Welcome to the Massachusetts Multicultural Film Festival, now in its 28th season. I am Daniel Pope, director of the 2021 festival, together with the help of Nefeli Forni Zervudaki, assistant curator. Nelly, would you like to take a bow?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight.
Wonderful. Nefeli guides our team of stellar undergraduate interns in the film studies program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst: Jackie Celestino, Sarai Rodriguez, Derek Hunter, Julia Fleischer, and Max Magus. We're very pleased to be partnering with New England Public Media for our opening event this season in honor of Black Heritage Month, and programmed to coincide with the premiere of the new, truly inspiring PBS series, The Black Church: This Is Our Story, This Is Our Song. The theme for the 28th annual MMFF is alliances. Now, a year into the global pandemic, we're all still coping with isolation and longing for connection. And at the same time, this past year has exposed in really high relief existing and widening divisions in the world. And so this season's festival presents an international program of documentary, narrative, and experimental films and media from the US, Puerto Rico, Iran, France, Egypt, Brazil, and South Korea that offer compelling visions of connection with people, ecologies, and ideas. We programmed this season with an eye also to the shadow side of alliances, flawed or failed alliances, or even misguided or malign confederacies. The films this season address themes of community, solidarity, allyship, and partnerships for social justice, environmental advocacy, and other endeavors to achieve some common good or to confront some prevailing ill. All season, filmmakers and film scholars will join us every Wednesday from February 17th today through April 7th for live conversations and Q&As with our online audience. The MMFF is made possible by the generous support of our sponsors. I'd like to thank UMass Amherst College of Humanities and Fine Arts, the UMass Arts Council, the Five College Film and Media Council, the College of Social and Behavioral Sciences at UMass Amherst, and also the support of our partners New England Public Media, the UMass Amherst Department of History Feinberg series. Their series this year is Planet on a Precipice. Also the Stonewall Center at UMass Amherst and the Translation Center at UMass Amherst. Our festival is presented by the Film Studies program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, Barbara Zecchi, Director of Film Studies, and the festival director, Sean Shimpak, is on sabbatical this year. And now it is my honor to present someone who I think we all owe a debt of gratitude to, Maxie C. Jackson III, the Chief Content Officer of New England Public Media and a 25-year veteran of public media, hired to expand NEPM's content and public service to better reflect the dynamic diversity of Western New England. And he will welcome our guests for tonight's conversation and Q&A with the producer directors of The Black Church, Stacey Holman and Shayla Harris, and our moderator, Amilcar Shabazz.
Thanks, Daniel. On behalf of New England Public Media, our partners, and the Massachusetts Multicultural Film Festival 2021, it's my honor to join the congregation of those honoring the Black Church during this special engagement. I'm reminded that as we celebrate Black History Month, it is absolutely necessary to remember that Black history doesn't begin with the transatlantic slave trade or chattel slavery throughout the Americas. Black history doesn't hit a high note with emancipation, Reconstruction, or the Civil Rights Movement. Instead, Black history flows from the deep well of humanity we find in the African, continental, and diasporic. The Black woman and man were first on the planet, the first to construct civilization, and the first to develop spiritual cultivation systems and religious practices. As such, the Black Church must be seen in the context of a long an illustrious expression of connection to nature, astrology, God, the all, and the one. Like all other institutions we access, you will be moved by the brilliance, genius, and creativity found where we trod, whether in the preacher's call-in response, the choir's audible exaltations, or the warmth and fellowship of its parishioners. The Black church was the safe and sacred space. The Black church, the crutch that did not give when Black folks leaned in and on. The Black church, ground zero for people subjected and objectified. The Black church, keeper of that old time religion, birthed anew, disfigured, distorted, and disguised, and yet familiar to a Black community who never believed they were without souls. We are grateful to McGee Media, Inkwell Media, and WETA Washington, D.C. for making it possible for us to bring you this virtual event. And of course, to our guests, Stacey L. Holman, series producer-director, and Shayla Harris, producer-director. New England Public Media is your home for documentary media, including Inkwell Media Productions, who, with Henry Louis Gates Jr., documentary work tells the important work, stories, and shared experience. I invite you to explore many of these films at nepm.org. It is now my pleasure to introduce our moderator, Dr. Amilcar Shabazz. Dr. Shabazz is a professor in the University of Massachusetts W.E.B. Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies. He teaches with an emphasis on the political economy of social and cultural movements, education, and public policy. His work includes Advancing Democracy, African Americans and the Struggle for Access and Equity in Higher Education in Texas, and The 40 Acres Documents, co-edited with Imari Obadele and Jonetta Scott Obadele, one of the earliest scholarly works in the modern movement for reparations. Shabazz currently serves as president of the National Council for Black Studies, the premier organization of Africana Studies professionals in the world. Dr. Amilcar Shabazz.
Thank you, Maxie. How good and how pleasant it is for I and I to come together in love and unity to share our questions, and receive some answers, to have a warm, off the cuff chat and conversation about this remarkable program. Let me tell you, I couldn't be there right when it aired live. I had to watch a little bit later, but I watched the whole 2 hours into early this morning, like 1 a.m., and I was riveted, as I hope and I expect many of you were. It is information that was not new to me. Most of it is not new. I've been teaching about the Black church, teaching courses at the university level on African American religious history since the early 1990s. I've used the book by Albert Rabbitoe, Invisible Institution. I've used work by C. Eric Lincoln and Lawrence Mamiya and Anthony Penn more recently, and who appeared in the documentary, and many others. Who some of the scholars that appeared, some of the folks that participated. Even had one friend that I've been in touch with who had posted on social media how he was interviewed for hours, and he didn't appear last night. And so he said, I guess he ended up on the cutting room floor. But that goes to say how much work everyone put into this. It tapped into some of the best scholarship that we have on African American religious history and culture and the experience of the Black church. It had footage, archival footage, and as well as scenes with my colleague Dr. Henry Louis Gates going to many of the sacred spaces of the Black church, talking with people there, singing with people there, These first 2 hours were really incredible work, and I'm so excited to bring our special guests of honor, Stacey Holman and Shayla Harris, to talk with us tonight. And if I can bring them online with us into the conversation, I'd like to just really first congratulate you, to thank you, to thank all of our ancestors that are a part of the work that was documented and chronicled, all of our people today that are out there working in the vineyard to preserve, to archive, to interpret, such as yourselves. So again, a big applause and thank you to both of you for your work.
Thank you for having us.
Let's get into some background. Good. Before the content, each of us talk to us about your journey into this, into doing this work, and just what are your feelings with the premiere just last night, and part 2 coming up in about an hour and a half. What's going through you right now?
Excitement. We've been holding on to this, or sitting on this, since July. And at every moment of production, and every month leading up to this, we're like, we wish it was coming out now. We wish it was coming out now. However, this timing is absolutely perfect. And I came to this project after working with Professor Gates, who I'll probably call Skip. I'll go between Professor and Dr. Gates and Skip through this time. Working with him, hour 3 was the hour that I was a part of, and learning that this was the next story he wanted to tell. And I put my bid in to say, I wanted to be part of it. I have a history of, growing up, spending time in the Black church, my grandparents' church. And I had the honor and the privilege, because it really is a privilege, to be able to tell the story and to work with Professor Gates. And, I felt, listening to his testimony, for lack of a better word, about his experience in the Black church was really an informative through line, as well as incorporating all the people that we spoke to, advisors and scholars and preachers, their stories. And I'm going to now toss it off to Shayla because then she came on board to help continue to tell this story.
Yeah, like Stacey, I'm incredibly honored and humbled to be a part of a series like this that's coming out at this particular moment, when I know a lot of people are looking for some sense of hope, some sense of community. And I know this series has been really refreshing to a lot of people. I know people have been missing their home churches and all of that stuff. So hopefully this has been a way for them to get back in touch with that kind of experience. I came to this project not having had a traditional kind of Black church experience. I grew Catholic. There's 4 million Catholics, if not more. And, it's Ash Wednesday, so I have to give, my people the shout out today. But, for me, my understanding of the Black church, like probably many people, is affiliated with the civil rights movement. So for me, a person who's done a lot of stories on African-American history and who has always had, an interest in religion, this seems like a really incredible opportunity to really delve into that history of an incredible institution that has played a pretty powerful role in a lot of ways that I didn't. To audiences and to spend some time with really incredible scholars and with Professor Gates, who not only is really smart and really brilliant, but is also really fun and just a loving person. So I think this story was like the best combination of all of those, just the heart and the mind and the soul.
How do you both see this project from the standpoint? Because I want to first acknowledge and bring into this the fact that you are both women, both African-American women, and it's covered in part 1 that we just watched, how in many ways, one of the tensions, one of the dynamics in the Black church is the both the influence of the white church and patriarchy of the white owning, oppressor society, but also within the African American nation within a nation, as Dr. Gates referred to it last in the series, in the episode, that within there are Black men trying to make some sort of claim on their manhood, I think is how it was presented, by exercising dominance over this invisible institution, the church, the Black church, as it rises. And yet you all bringing your personhood, your womanhood into the making of this, you really centered brilliantly. I thought one of the strongest parts of the 2 hours was the focus on some of these questions of gender, of patriarchy, of masculinity and womanhood. And you, of course, had access to one of the finest scholars. I've taught her book, Righteous Discontent, and the many times that I've taught African American religious history, and Evelyn Brooks Higginbotham. And she spoke to a lot of that. A lot of it's still very truncated. We didn't get into politics of respectability and so forth. Maybe it's coming up with the Great Migration and whatnot later in the episode later tonight. But speak about what it means for you all, with all of your history behind you, but also in the filmmaking industry as it still exists today, as still a very male-dominated kind of space, to have the support, to have the power given to you by the executive producer, Dr. Gates, to shape this work, to define it, to bring your all of the identities, all of the knowledge, wisdom, and understanding you have to this project. How does that show up in the work that you might want to share with us tonight?
Shayla, you want me to go first, or I can start and Shayla can jump in. I will say that in doing and telling the story, we knew that, number one, these institutions were not just built by men. We knew that there were definitely women behind at every front. And even today, if you look at the Black church, and it was important that that voice was clearly heard, clearly represented, clearly shown in the first part and even the second part. You cannot talk about the Black church, like you can't talk about music, you cannot talk about preaching, and you cannot not talk about women. And because they are such an integral part of what makes the institution survive, what is keeping it going. And even if you look at congregations today, what do you see? You see primarily women. And one thing that is really wonderful working with Dr. Gates is he tells you what he's interested, the stories he wants to tell. However, he also gives you that he trusts you. He gives you, and he's like, okay, here you go. This is the story I want to tell. And we're able to then take it from there and, put our personal touches. One thing that was really important is making this a collaborative effort. And that even meant in terms of how we presented these stories. It was important that in every hour we acknowledge, the women. Like we wanted as a constant theme going back to, and the women, and the women, and the women. And also too, as people will see in the second hour, the stained glass ceiling, and how it's still, with Jarena Lee, 1833 and 2021, it's still an issue. And I feel just, as a woman, it is, it's empowering. And I feel that, we definitely provide a personal and unique perspective in telling this narrative, particularly when it's a narrative that hasn't really been, I think, discussed at the length that it has been with the series. And in terms of the industry as a whole, I'll just kind of start that off a little bit. And I know Shayla's probably had her own experience too. I think there's so many ceilings that have cracks, but nothing has fully been broken. And I think just as we continue to be in the roles that we're in, to have the positions that we have to tell the stories, and also to to highlight other women's stories, that ceiling will continue to be cracked. And, working with Shayla, it was, a great experience. And I felt like we were like double teaming to make sure that we were holding each other accountable to say, you need more women, or we need less men, better yet.
Shayla?
What Stacey was saying, that I think one of the really important parts of this project was that, it wasn't that hard to tell the women's story because everybody was so vocal about it. Everybody was really candid that this was a longstanding issue within the church that needed to be talked about, and that as much as this story is this long history of this institution, it's not just a celebration. It is, holding this institution's feet to the fire when it hasn't actually been all things that it could be to everyone in the community. So I think that was really important for us to have that sort of honesty and that candor within the series. But I also think that what we show in the series is that the women aren't silenced. A righteous discontent isn't quiet. A lot of the women, decided to leave the church, create their own organizations, create their own churches, and make a way out of no way if the church wasn't offering them the pulpits that they felt like they deserved. And so I think that's another sort of important legacy to point out, that these women were pushing the church to expand its the institution, to make space for them. And then when they felt like it was falling short, they went out and created something new, which I think is something that we kept seeing over and over. And I think that was an important point for us to highlight in a.
Great. I'm getting feedback already from viewers live in real time, so I'd like to kind of work some of this in reference to Black women in the church. And I appreciate what you've talked about in the filmmaking and the making of as well in the industry. Let me pause before the question. I'm in the Du Bois Department of Afro-American Studies at UMass Amherst. And when I arrived, with many of the founding members, many of whom participated in the civil rights movement, participated in the freedom struggles of the 60s and 70s. And they particularly worked on, many of them appeared in, worked on the documentary series Eyes on the Prize, Henry Hampton, Black Side. And I will honestly tell you, for the longest time, that work to me outstrips anything done on African people. Nothing by Ken Burns can hold a candle. Nothing by anyone else I've seen on PBS or anything. Actually, until tonight. Now you're only 4 hours. They had a lot more time to do the civil rights movement, a much smaller piece of history, by the way, than what you're looking at. But how, in many ways, does in the filmmaking industry, the opportunity you all have had to bring this work forward, help us understand and situate it historically, and is it in a mold of a certain tradition of filmmaking we should know about and celebrate this addition to?
And Shayla, you want to start with that, and I can.
Yeah, I think what opportunity we have, not just as women, but as Black filmmakers too, is to tell this story from that perspective, right? And I think there is a movement within documentary and journalism to not leave your identities and not leave your understanding of the world at the door. And so I think this series was really an opportunity for not just us, but also for Dr. Gates to really infuse our personal feelings, our sensibilities, and our intellect really into this exploration of the Black church. And I think having a platform like PBS is like a really incredible opportunity to showcase that kind of approach. And so we're really grateful for that, to be able to reach audiences nationwide. Film festival or a niche. So I think that is is useful and important, and something that we certainly learned from the legacy of Eyes on the Prize, which I think is really incredible. I think that's awesome, and hopefully a series like this, I think part of the challenge is that even though everyone thinks 4 hours seems like a lot of time, it really isn't, as all the filmmakers out there know, to tell every story that you want to tell. And so hopefully people will watch this series and be like, oh my gosh, I'm so interested in, X subject. I'd love to make my own documentary about that. And so that, we're the root and then these other people become the branches, I think is something that we would love to spark from a series like this.
Well, Stacey, you want to jump on that too?
I think Shayla summed it up so perfect. She summed it up perfectly.
Sure.
I think, again, PBS is a great platform to tell these stories. And I feel like with, every generation, we have to kind of retell and remind people about the history. And also too, as we learn more about the history, as we get more archive that is shared and revealed and discovered, we have new ways of showing our history. So I think, it's, our story is ongoing. Our series just is the tip of the iceberg of the Black experience. And we know that there are going to be many stories to come that surround, in this case, the Black religious experience in this country.
Right. Well, if I can share my screen, I want to say part of the way we looked at this work and thinking about this work is this working? Okay. Whoa,
wow.
That went
trippy.
That went pretty trippy, yes. But the bishop that you had, are we going to see more of her in part 2?
Bishop Vashti McKenzie?
Yes, you will.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was.
Well,
yeah, she was great. Trust me, we're like, how, we had to be careful because we could have had a whole hour with a lot of people, and she being one of them. She could have had her own hour for the series.
Yeah.
Where was she? Where did we see her?
Sure.
Was that in Mother Emanuel Church?
Yes, that was in Mother Emanuel.
That's so powerful. That's so powerful. What I was trying to share was let's see, I think it's going application window. This may be the way. So what we see here is we've entitled our little conversation here, telling our story, singing our song, preserving and protecting our sacred spaces in dangerous times. And of course, those dangerous times, we have only to think about not only some of the instances presented in the film itself, but also more recently, Dylan Roof's attack at Mother Emanuel, the attack here in Western Massachusetts of the church after the election of Barack Obama in 2008. And more recently, just this past November, with the attack on Martin Luther King Community Presbyterian Church, that these are dangerous times for our sacred spaces. And so to take this time to look at the preservation of the Black church through film, to look at how we can protect these spaces better is so important. I wanted to just dedicate my participation tonight in this to my father, Edward Alfred Frank Jr., who just recently passed away. And so it brought me back to my home church as part of his rites of Christian burial. We were in that church. This is the church I grew up in. I was not an altar server. I was a lector. And here you see me at, 14 or 15 at the pulpit doing the readings as the lectern does in the Catholic Church service. So Shayla and I, we share this background. Growing up in this church, all the people are of African descent, except for the faith, the leadership of the church, the pastor, the women religious, the nuns. Those were all white. But these days that has changed. Our pastor is Father Emmanuel Igbafe, who grew up in Nigeria, who himself started out as a Muslim and converted to Catholicism. And he comes to us most recently from pastoring a church, a parish in Ireland, where many of his congregation had never seen a person of African descent in person, live.
Wow.
And so it was pointed out that, you know, they had supported mission work in Africa for so many centuries, how wonderful it was that now they would reap the fruits they had sown, the harvest, the seeds they had sown by having someone from Africa come and give pastoral leadership to the church there outside of Dublin, where he was the pastor. But this is my home church, our Mother of Mercy Catholic Church. And I have to say how, you know, it's interesting to think about how Catholicism so far hasn't shown up very much in these 2 hours. And I know you have a lot to deal with. And of course, Church of God in Christ, Pentecostals, the Methodist Episcopal, and the Baptist Church figure large numerically in terms of the population. But for those of us in the Catholic Church, we do come up with those white depictions of Jesus. We do come up with those all over the church. Certainly I did. We do come up with a very different kind of music. I was born before Vatican II, when half the service was in Latin. And the kind of singing we did was tantum ergo sacramentum veneremus senui et itinquam documentum novo sedat ritui, blah, blah, blah. That St. Thomas Aquinas composed that in something like 1250 of the Common Era. So, you know, very different kind of thing than what you profile. Are we not to be a part of this story, or is this part of the Black church too in your mind? Maybe Shayla, you jump on that since we come out of this same faith.
I feel like, you know, I'm the representative Catholic on the Black church team, and I definitely represented my brothers and sisters of the faith throughout the series. I think one of the things that we were really mindful of in terms of this project was focusing on people in America. And, you know, part of the way that we talked about the Catholic influence is that a lot of the early Africans who came to this country had actually been converted to Catholicism on the continent, and so had come to these shores when they were brought to these shores, had already experienced that faith, and certainly Islam they had already been exposed to, and certain traditional religions. And so I think for us, when we're talking about the story of the Black church in America, that's sort of where it started, and trying to figure out how to tell the Catholic story when we're talking about, you know, denominations and experiences and rituals that were shaped by slavery and the experience of slavery and emancipation and all of that stuff. It got a little bit harder to find a place for the Catholic experience in particular, which is in parallel to a lot of that stuff that we're talking about. But I think we were able to include a lot of voices from folks who had grown up in the Catholic Church, including, you know, scholars like Eddie Glaude, who grew up in the South as a Catholic, and Anthea Butler, who's a proud Black Catholic. And we also got to visit a very thriving Black Catholic community in Chicago at St. Sabina, and spoke with their pastor about their experience and what sort of transformations they went through in the 60s in terms of grappling with the issue of race in the Catholic Church. And so, yeah, if there was a Black church DVD extras or Black church part 2, you know, I may even be, you know, planting some seeds for like a Black nun. So it's out there. It's out there. I think it's incredibly rich. And, you know, we're also interested in taking Dr. Gates to meet the Oblate sisters in Baltimore and take him to that, you know, their really incredible space there where they've been really involved in education. And so there's a rich story there to be told for sure. And again, 4 hours seems like a lot of time, but it was really hard. But it's not to say that it isn't a valuable story and an important story, and also a part of the fabric of Black religiosity in America as well.
But thank you for indulging me a little bit with my story, your story. You know, my mother went through K-12 in Catholic schools in Beaumont, Texas, even high school, Blessed Sacrament High School, which was short-lived as a private African-American high school. She then even went to college, African-American college in Xavier in New Orleans, Xavier of Louisiana. In New Orleans until she transferred following my dad's military service, and she went to other universities. But she started out and intended to go to finish at Xavier as well. So we do have a rich story that's a little different than the dominant one that we study and we talk about in African American religious history. But just wanted to bring that in. I know we have some Q&A that's moving in the comments. We have other special guests we want to bring in. But just one other thing in terms of your views on how the Black church is empowering Black women today, as you saw it, as you present in the film. Historically, we look at the motto of the National Colored Women, lifting as we climb. And a question comes to us, is that message still holding true today with many women in the African American church? Are they being similarly empowered and empowering through certain structures within the church to show up for the community?
I would say it really depended on who we spoke to. We spoke to a lot of women, and most would probably say, yes, there are some changes. Yes, there is definitely some, breakthrough happening, but there are still some that would, say no. And it also depends on, I just think of Brianna Crawford. She is a young pastor based out of Texas, Dallas, Texas, and she's kind of doing her own thing as a church because she's had her own experience dealing with an actual brick and mortar structure, but she has found that she has more power, more agency to do something that is outside the confines of that. So I feel like as Jarena Lee was walking and traveling from place to place doing her ministry, I feel like that's the same today for women. And I don't know when and if that will ever change, but there still are some denominations that are still very close to the vest about what women's roles are. But I feel that women are still working through and around that to definitely present their message and how the message is being presented through them.
Great. We've had questions about African Americans and Islam. There was, of course, a little bit on it in part one. Is there going to be more? Will they talk about other aspects of Black Muslims in part two? Anything to say on that? The teaser to give us on that?
Oh, yeah. So hour 3 deals with that. We're looking at we start off with the Great Migration, and we really start seeing the politics of respectability, which you brought up earlier. And you just start seeing Chicago as this haven of just all these different religious beliefs, which speaks to that the Black church is not monolithic. It's so much more. And we talk about even Nation of Islam and discuss Malcolm X and what he was preaching or what he was speaking to when it came to faith. So I like to think we do not shy away from just the controversy. We do not shy away from the challenges or the pushback that the church was experiencing from other denominations.
Fabulous. Nephali or Daniel, if you want to come back in and join, or however you want to cue us up about some of our community guests, we're ready for to enter that phase of our conversation.
Hello. This is so fascinating and really just a powerful conversation, and I'm loving it. And Amilcar, if there is a guest that we have several people from local leadership, so we could bring in someone who you would like to talk with right now. I mean, we have Vanessa Ford, I think, backstage.
Way to go.
Okay.
We've had some preliminary discussions. Vanessa, I don't know if some of what we've talked about already gets at some of the questions you have, but please come on in and talk to us about what's on your mind. Reverend Ford.
Good evening, everyone. Indeed, it's a pleasure. Thank you, Dr. Shabazz. To our wonderful, extraordinary filmmakers, thank you for putting this documentary together in such a powerful way. The message is that there is exciting and riveting history of the Black church that tells us there is an incredible past. We have enormous weight on us for what we need to do right now as a Black church, and the future is ours if we receive the calling. And so I see the line you've showed us how to mark history and to see how the past has really come to us to remind us of the work that the Black church, could I say, should be doing in our world today. And I'm thankful. It's really amazing. It's really beautiful. So thank you so much for sharing this. This is really remarkable. And I think it's the perfect timing for us to have this as an incredible reminder of where we should be.
I think one of the things you had brought up so brilliantly in a conversation we had about the film leading up to it was we talk about dangerous times for our people and for our sacred spaces in the midst of us working to make Black lives matter. But it's also how the church as a site of resilience was so much brought up in our conversation. And did you want to speak a little bit to that, to our especially posing questions to our filmmakers here?
Yes, I would like your your opinion and your remarkable insight and perception on the fact that our church, the Black church, has been so remarkably present throughout all of the civil rights movements and helped to restore the ills of society and to be there present, leading the way for all of the marches and protests and things like that. Really, the church was a place where the meetings took place for the marches, right? And the headquarters of the meetings for getting things started. The church was the catalyst for those type of movements, a place where it could come together and be empowered and encouraged and worship together and fellowship together and be inspired to go out to make a difference. And I want to know how you feel the church has been relevant today. And is it still relevant? Are we still, as a Black church, really the head? Are we the guide that we should be in terms of moving these movements forward? Like, I feel like the Black church should be at the head of these things and support the young people who, from all different walks of life and all different faiths, need pastors and guiders to say, we are here for you, we support you, we trust you, we believe in you, we, all those things of encouragement. So I just really wanted to know where you feel like the Black church has been a source of strength, and if you think it's still relevant in the movement of where we are in society today.
Hour 4, that's a great question, Reverend Ford. And that's something that we do address in Hour 4, which is the hour that Shayla directed and produced. And I will just say this about this exact moment in terms of the relevance of the church. We're coming and we're still in this pandemic. What have we lost? We've lost community. We've lost, gathering together. And what does the church do but bring us together? So I believe at this moment that the church is even more relevant because it reminds us of what we need, what gets us through, what carries us through, and that is community. That's gathering, whether it's now on Zoom or whether it's, you know, over the phone. However, I think it's definitely a question, it was a question we asked everybody. And, you know, Shayla, she really teased this out in her hour. So.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that question. It's certainly an important one, and especially now, it's at the forefront of everyone's mind. And, you know, I think that there is no answer, right? There's just so many questions right now. And I think part of what will probably come out of this conversation that I think a lot of people will be having is just the form of how church will evolve. And I think that is a conversation that people are having. As Stacey mentioned, you know, people can't gather together. And so there's virtual spaces, you know, they don't necessarily gather in four walls or brick and mortar kind of space to enact their spiritual practice. So I think there are a lot of things like that I think the church is grappling with, like technology, with generational shifts, and just timing. You know, like people have a lot of demands and competing demands for their attention, and so how does the church address those? And you know, I think there's a lot of different things that people are trying across the country, but it's certainly a conversation that needs to be had right now. And, you know, we're so grateful for the folks who are doing the work in the community. One of the takeaways that I had while working on this project is that the church and the Black church specifically is a multi-generational space. It's a space where young people and old people and different kinds of generations can get together. And I think leveraging that opportunity could be something that's really powerful going forward, is how those generations share their knowledge, share their understanding, and share their perspectives. And so, you know, I think that's probably something that, you know, the church going forward is going to be tapping into a little bit more, hopefully.
Thank you. And thank you, Reverend Ford, for that. We want to bring in another of our guests to join the conversation with Reverend Terrellyn L. Curry Avery of Martin Luther King Jr. Community Presbyterian Church. And as we get ready for that part of the conversation, would just like to note that I'm echoing. The question comes online. Watching how the Black
I feel like he's asking a really good question and we can't hear him.
Well, I think the question is how the Black church has helped in the past and created a sense of community space, and how much has the Black church helped you and your family? I don't know if you want to answer that or agree.
I'm sorry. So was he asking that question of me?
Well, if you wanted to add to that question too.
Okay, because I didn't hear exactly what your question was.
I'm sorry. Somebody's helping with my mic and going.
So can you just repeat a part of the question, please, for me?
So however you want to enter, you don't have to enter with that question, but something that came from online was about how much Black church helped those in the past and to create a sense of community and a safe space that's shown in part one. How much has the Black church helped you and your family and is doing things today to create that sense of community and safe space?
So that's really an excellent question, because for me, I actually grew up in Mississippi, and I grew up during a time where when you attended one church, you actually had to attend the other churches locally. And so for me, it built a huge sense of community. It gave me confidence in who I am. It actually has helped me probably to become the preacher that I am today, because back in the day, if you got up and you did a piece of poetry or a poem in church, they just gave you regards for how well you did. And then you had to go to the neighbor's church and do it as well. And so for me, I think it's a huge part of helping me as a Black woman to know who I am and whose I am. And so, you mentioned earlier about our church burning down. We understand that the church is a building, but our community, our faith community, we are the church. And so we have that great sense of resiliency that you were talking to Reverend Ford about. So I think the Black church for me has been an integral part of my life. And you were speaking also, we're not a monolith because I'm Presbyterian. So in fact, we were a little bit different than the traditional Black churches in some ways, in the ways that we worship, but not in the ways in which we were a community. So I do want to thank the producers for really showing just this variety of ways in which we as Black people can worship. But we all have a strong sense of who we are spiritually. And I think that's the thing that ties us together.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the thoughts that I had when you were talking earlier, when you were doing this filming, did you notice for young people, because often there's an absence of young people in the actual church building. And so I'm wondering, did you notice any ways in which our young people have not benefited from having the same thing that I had when they grew up? Or do you think they're finding their own way and they're learning to have a sense of resiliency and pride and faith despite not having the traditional Black church?
I'm going to defer to what Tracy Blackman said. And she is, for those who don't know, she is a reverend based out of St. Louis, Missouri, and she was very active and still continues to be active in Black Lives Matter movement. And one thing she says is that the Black Lives movement was church. And that stuck with me. And it feels like, the organization, the idea, what you talked about, Reverend Avery, it's not happening in those four walls, but it's happening outside. We spoke to, might have been Barbara Savage, who discussed the idea that people are looking at spirituality. They're looking at their own way of understanding and seeing God, turning and returning to traditional forms of worship that our ancestors were doing when or before they were brought here. So, we didn't get too much into that aspect of it, but we did talk about, and we did, kind of address that with everyone that we spoke to. But I felt like Reverend Blackman's answer really kind of surmised, what, the youth are doing, what the millennial IG TikTok generation are relating and how connecting spiritually and what they're seeking.
Myself, young people, and I would definitely agree with that. And I often think about how they're not being raised in the way that I was raised, but at the same time, they're finding their own path as it relates to God and spirituality.
Yeah.
Vanessa Ford just sent me a message that she's a psalmist. She's part of the music ministry, consultant to the music ministry in her church. So we're making everybody reverend tonight. We're reverencing everyone. But Barbara is here. Shall we bring Barbara in to pose a question or a comment about the documentary? Reverend Headley, come in.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. It's good to be here and to definitely be here with my two sisters, Stacey and Shayla. We thank God for what you've done in terms of producing this documentary with Professor Gates. what I've been hearing, and I'm so glad to hear you guys share your perspective. First of all, I think it's already been discussed about women in the church, and the fact that it's women, two Black sisters who produced this about the Black church, that in so many ways has said so much to me and to so many people, that the two of you would use your gifts to tell the story, and I thank God for that. You know, one of the things that I want to turn to say to two of you and ask a question, you know, having taught in the academy myself for a season, I've always admired, I've always followed Dr. Gates's studies and works in Black history and such. And sometimes scholars can get to the point where they're detached from that which they examine. Even if that's part of their past and culture. So I would, and you shared a little bit of your own experiences, your own religious or spiritual experience. Were there any aha moments for you? Were there any dispelling of myths about the Black church that you encountered as you went through this process of getting all this history and putting all of this together? What did you learn? I mean, you're sharing a lot with us, and much of this, for some of us who teach this and is trying to get this across to our congregation, this is not new. But what about you? What did you learn, or what did you have to dispel about your understanding about the Black church?
That's a great question. It's not easy being on the other side of the camera where people are asking you the tough questions. So thank you so much for that. I mean, I actually thought what was really powerful about working on the series is that, you know, those scholars, when we asked them to tell us about their faith experience and their background, a lot of them really softened. I think they don't often talk about it. And that was actually really, I think, heartening for them to kind of understand that we were trying to get at something a little bit different that didn't necessarily go dry. But I think for me, the biggest aha was just the women who would not be held down. You know, the women who are just like pushing against all boundaries. And I didn't know how far back that legacy went, and that was really inspiring for me as a filmmaker and as a maker and as somebody who really believes in the work that I do, to really see that. And I'll give Stacey some time to answer it quickly if she can.
I'm kind of piggyback off you. I'm going to say Reverend Prathia Hall. That was a name when we asked people, the top 5 preachers. Mm-hmm. She was pretty much on majority of everybody's lips. And just, again, an example of a woman who is behind the scenes, really doing incredible work and inspiring some historic speeches. I'll just leave it at that. So people will watch our part 2 this evening. But just, you know, again, these unsung heroines, it was a privilege to really give them, and women that I was not aware of, like Reverend Prathia Hall, and her contribution was really enlightening and just emboldening for me.
Well, listen, folks, we have part 2 coming up in just a brief, a few 30 minutes, I think. And I want to bring Daniel back in to help us bring this part to a close. I just would say that, quoting from an article in the Huffington Post by one of your talking heads that I think you gave a chance to redeem himself, Eddie Glaude, the Black church as we've known it or imagined it is dead. Of course, many African Americans still go to church, but the idea of this venerable institution as central to Black life and as a repository for the social and moral conscience of the nation has all but disappeared. That was 10 years ago. He didn't seem to be trumpeting that in the documentary, at least in the part I watched last night. But again, I think it's clear that, all goodbyes ain't gone, and the Black church is still here and still a big part of the redemptive force of this country, as well as of still very central to Black life. And thank you for your work showing us that truth. Daniel? I
can't do better than that, Amilcar. Long live the Black church. I just want to thank again Stacey Holman and Shayla Harris for joining us, and Amilcar Shabazz for your leadership in organizing this event and moderating it. Extraordinary. And again, thanks to our partner NEPM, especially Maxie Jackson and Marie Wechter, who worked so hard to make these events happen. And thanks to our sponsors, of course, to our audience as well for your excellent questions. I wish we could have answered them all tonight. Remember to join us next week for our conversation with the director of Landfall, Cecilia Alderondo, introduced by Patricia Montoya. Details at umass.edu/film/MMFF. Now take a break, get a snack and something to drink, and go watch The Black Church on your PBS station or pbs.org or on the PBS app. You'll be so glad you did. Thank you. Good night.